I bought this book when I was an undergraduate over 30 years ago. It has great sentimental value to me. However, it is a typical trade paperback. You can see the acid burn in the covers. The paper is quite acidic. You can see atmospheric effects leaching into the paper. This book will not last. This book will turn to dust, hopefully after I've shuffled off this mortal coil, but probably not that long after. However, I see on the internet all the time people wanting to turn paperbacks into so-called heirloom quality leather-bound books. I've never really been interested in doing this, despite the number of views that these videos get. Until Linda contacted me and gave me a compelling reason for doing it. Linda works at a living museum and wants to put cookbooks in a display in a covering that's not out of place with the period display. She has modern softcover versions of the cookbooks and wants to put some sort of cover on them so that they fit into the display. Over the years, I have been brought quite a few perfect bound books that have fallen apart, originally in soft covers, that I have put back together and put in hard covers. I have looked around to see what other people were doing, and I wasn't really impressed with any of the techniques, especially for a book that was still in a sound binding, and I didn't want to pull a book apart. So I've come up with this technique, which I'm going to present in these videos. It's probably going to be a two-part series. The main feature of this book is that I'm going to use the original covers as inserts to split boards. I'll attach a hollow tube on the spine of the book. That's the same width as the book with the boards. And so that tube is going to overhang the shoulders, and then I'll reinforce those shoulders with twine or cord, and then I'll put a leather spine on it and buckram on the boards. I'll start by making the split boards. I'm just using manila card for the inside lighter weight board and 2mm grey board for the outside board. Now, I'm not completely happy with this design, but I think at the moment it's my favourite idea for doing this, of turning a paperback into a hardcover book. The reason I like it is that it leaves the integrity of the original binding alone, and it has a really strong attachment between the original book and the new covers, I guess, because it's not really the binding, and that's the split board. So I wouldn't recommend just following this slavishly. I'd recommend using it as a starting point or an inspiration. Now, I need to glue to the spine, and it's with that plastic coating on it, it just won't adhere very well, so I just sanded that plastic coating off. I'll trim the covers to about a third of the width of the book, and then I'll notch them at the head and the tail for the turn-ins. Very similar to, I guess, the springback bindings and the library bindings as well, or split board bindings. The notches go down about 25mm or 1 inch. You will see me use a finishing press and the nipping press, but they're not essential. Another thing I was trying to do was do a project that didn't need any specialist equipment. To that end, I also tried to simplify the leather work. So I don't wet out the leather and I use PVA. Now, I'm not sure that that actually makes it easier, but for people that aren't used to working with leather and using paste, I think that approach is a bit too foreign, so I've tried to stick with the PVA approach, though I do think it makes it harder. So I'm just going to tip in a couple of folios of cream paper for end papers. I'll just tip those under the original covers. I won't be able to get them right to the spine because of the glue, but just get it as far back as possible. It's hopeless trying to fold the end papers and cut them before applying them to the book, so it's better to make them oversized and then trim them once they're on the book. The split boards are cut to the correct height before attaching, but the width can be cut on the book. That's the easiest way to do it. So I'll start by trimming up the front edge where the split is. The height will be, I'll use 3mm squares, so it's the height of the text block plus 2 times 3, 203. So I'll use my bench hook to cut the boards to size. Now before I go to attach the boards, I'll just dry fit them to see what the fit is like, and clearly there's a problem, and I've actually cut the boards to 213 instead of 203mm, which is a good indication why instead of measuring you should probably take measurements from the actual book, but it's just in my nature to measure. I'll fit the boards to the book again and get the boards into location, and then I'll put some registration marks on the boards and on the text so that I can get them back into location easily once I put PVA in the split boards and before the PVA keys the boards into place. Now I'm going to put them 8mm away from the spine of the book. So it's a 4mm groove, 2mm for the shoulders, and 2mm for the thickness of the leather. I'm going to use pressing tins, but if you don't have pressing tins, some thin plastic, sort of hard plastic, and just instead of pressing boards, you can use chopping boards from the supermarket, and a brick for weight instead of a press. I was very happy that Linda made me think about this project a lot more than I had in the past. I'd always been very focused on the typical trade paperback, like my old Rumpole. When I started thinking about it and thinking about Linda's copies of historic cookbooks, I started looking at similar books that I had, such as this History of Scotland, and realised that these books weren't made of the same low-quality materials as trade paperbacks. And you saw me test the pH of the covers of this book, and they were slightly alkaline, and the paper looked a higher quality as well. So I think for these types of books, this technique is more valid. Something that I couldn't do, which I was very disappointed about, was produce a book that looked in the style of the period of the original book. It just, I just wasn't able to come up with a way to do that. And the biggest obstacle was the lack of round. I did try heating up some of these books to soften the glue and the perfect binding to see if I could round the books, but that was a complete failure. The books just fell apart. I just couldn't do it. So the lack of round really, to me, detracts from the look of the book. But most people won't notice that. It's people that know about books and the history of books, such as bookbinders, that will notice this. The general public's not going to notice it. I'll put some headbands on the book. If you don't have machine-made headbands, then you can make your own with a bit of stripy cotton and a bit of heavy thread. And then I'm going to fill in between the headbands with a bit of linen fabric. Any sort of linen, cotton fabric will do. I also think that it helps with adhesion to the spine so that it's less likely the spine tube will pop off later. Getting back to the design of this book, I was thinking, what do people generally think about when they think of an old book? Well, they think leather, they think raised bands, maybe a spine label, maybe some gold tooling, and I think that's really enough. If I can hit all those criteria, then I think it won't look jarring in a historical display. So that's sort of what I've tried to do. But then in terms of functional aspects, putting the hollow tube on was to try and produce a bit more flexibility. I'm not sure whether that's been successful. The split board provides really good attachment of the text to the covers, and the groove at the external joint helps with the opening of the book, though I also find it a bit of a distraction because an 18th century book wouldn't have that feature. Now I'm going to make a tube for the spine. It's going to be a 1 on 2 off hollow, and I want it the same width as the book with the boards. Now the boards with the card on the inside are about 2.5 millimeters each, so the width of the text is 20 millimeters plus 5 millimeters, 25 millimeters is the width of the tube I'm going to make. And I remembered that's the width of my ruler, so that made it easy to measure. So as I said, it'll be a 1 on 2 off. I'll make the tube longer than the book, and I'll trim it afterwards above the end bands. When it comes time to apply the tube to the book, I couldn't think of how to get it centered, but then I remembered that it's the same width as the book, and I checked that, and then I just put the book flat on the bench and then use the bench as a guide to attach the tube. You'll see what I mean when I do it, and it works really well. It's a good trick. Now I'm going to reinforce the fake shoulder with some hemp cord. My teacher June taught me about making false shoulders on thin books using cord, and reinforcing shoulders with cord is done in other situations as well. Just saturate the cord in adhesive and then stick it into the book up against the fake shoulder and mold it to shape. Once that's dried, I'll put the false bands on the spine. I'm just going to equally space them, 4 of them. I'm going to use some tooling leather for the bands, so it's about 2 millimeters thick. I'll cut them to about 3 millimeters wide each, and then just glue them flesh side down to the spine. Once these have dried in place, use a sharp knife to cut them off. Cut them off at a slant so that they sort of give the hint of a round in the spine. I'll cut the tube spine to the same height as the headbands, and I'll also trim the sharp corner off the fake shoulders. I'll also back corner the boards so that there isn't a sharp corner pushing through the leather. The last thing I'll do today is split the ends of the spine tube. I'll split them down about 1 inch, which will be sufficient to allow the turn-ins for the cover leather for the spine. And once I've done that, then the book is pretty close to ready for covering, which we'll do next week. So next week we'll go over covering the book, and at that point I will point out almost a design flaw in this book. There's an aspect that I'm not very happy with, but bookbinding is often about compromises. So this is a significant compromise in this book. Maybe someone has a better way of doing this. It would be really nice if someone did. I'd love to hear about it. But that's it for this week. I hope you've got something out of it. As always, I really appreciate the big thumbs up button. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button. I hope everyone's taking care, and until next time, cheerio.